As a former governor, and as us being governors together, we both know that a budget should be two things: fiscally responsible and a reflection of our values and our priorities. I look forward to hearing more about the administration's priorities when it comes to our nation's energy policy. Last year, Congress clearly laid out several of our energy priorities when we passed the Energy Act of 2020. The Energy Act was the first comprehensive update to our nation's energy policy in 13 years. It enjoyed broad bipartisan support, with nearly 70 senators co-sponsoring or sponsoring provisions that included in the bill. It prioritized research, development, demonstration, and commercialization of next-generation technologies at the Department of Energy. These are the innovations that will be necessary to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings and the power and industrial sectors, which accounted for 62% of our emissions in 2018, while creating jobs and keeping American energy affordable and globally competitive. If we are going to be able to maintain our energy independence and combat climate change, the way to do it is through innovation, not elimination. Our bill contained $35.2 billion in authorizations for R&D activities across DOE's portfolio over the next 5 years, including over $7.6 billion for fiscal year 2022 to ensure the United States remains on the cutting edge of innovation and can lead the world. While I'm disappointed that the President's budget request does not appear to include full funding for the Energy Act, it does provide strong support in some vitally important areas. For example, I was pleased to see $140 million plus up from fiscal year 21 enacted levels for the Fossil Energy Office and strong support for the National Energy Technology Lab, including $25 million for the design and construction of a direct air capture facility. Well, that falls short of what we included in the Energy Act, with 1,063 coal-fired power plants planned around the world, none in the United States, I might add. It is imperative that we lead the world in getting technologies like carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration commercialized, and I'm encouraged by this showing of support for the Fossil Energy Office to do just that. The budget request also provides over $400 million to develop widely available, cost-competitive technologies for the production, storage, and delivery of hydrogen, which is the area of great potential to help decarbonize several sectors of the economy without increasing our reliance on other countries, such as China. It also includes $400 million for Weatherization Assistance Program, which helps low-income families, seniors, and individuals with disabilities make lasting energy efficiency improvements to their homes, freeing up finite resources for other essentials like food and medicine. As markets and other forces transition our energy mix, we cannot leave behind the workers who powered our nation to greatness. We must ensure these workers have every opportunity in the world to succeed. So I was also pleased to see that the budget request includes support for the new Office of Energy Jobs, which is a welcome and much-needed addition to the department. Secretary Granholm, I want to thank you again for being here today, for all you do at the DOE and for our country as both an authorizer and appropriator. I look forward to hearing from you today about the administration's priorities for the Department of Energy. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our ranking member, Brasso, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Madam Secretary, thanks for your involvement in our announcement in Wyoming and for your active role and participation. We're very grateful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing. Energy is called the master resource for a reason. It powers our nation, our military, our economy, and America has the world's largest energy resources. Bad policies, though, are creating blackouts and energy shortages and an increasing dependence on foreign adversaries. All across our country, gasoline prices are spiking just when families who've been shut in for months want to take well-earned vacations. To fill up a truck in Wyoming is now about $15 to $20 more for the fill-up than it was at the beginning of the Biden administration. Our electric grids are under growing strain as wind and solar energy displace reliable coal and nuclear power. Where we once worried about OPEC's control over energy supplies, we're now witnessing China and Russia dominate critical supply chains. And at the rate we're going, America may soon face an energy crisis like we did in the mid-'70s. That energy crisis was so grave that President Jimmy Carter said solving it, he says, was, quote, the moral equivalent of war. In 1977, President Carter told Congress, no agency anywhere in the federal government has the broad authority needed to deal with our energy problems in a comprehensive way. and the Department of Energy was established to do just that. So after decades of work, America rose to the challenge, turned an economic, national security, and a geopolitical liability into an advantage for our country. We became more energy efficient. We developed new technologies like hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, deep water exploration. These unlocked vast new supplies of American energy. Trump administration unleashed the nation's energy potential. Because of policies like cutting red tape, approving long-delayed pipelines, and opening up the Arctic for exploration, the United States became energy self-sufficient, self-reliant for the first time in nearly 70 years. Yet, as the Wall Street Journal recently warned, the U.S. is barreling toward one of the greatest self-inflicted wounds in our history. During its first week in office, President Biden killed the Keystone XL pipeline, banned all new federal oil, gas, and coal leases. The EPA has promised to impose a slew of punishing regulations. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is making it harder to permit natural gas pipelines. And on June 1st, the Biden administration suspended all oil and gas leases in the Alaska Arctic in defiance of a 2017 law explicitly directing the federal government to open the territory. Meanwhile, China and Russia continue to open new coal mines, build new coal plants, and develop oil and gas resources at home and abroad. China and Russia are working to gain a commanding share of global resource markets, and they are succeeding. In March, the United States imported more oil from Russia than from any other country but Canada. We now get more oil from Russia than we produce in Alaska. Senator Murkowski said that the other day at a hearing right in this very room. The Biden administration's energy policies are now having predictable effects. Gas prices have spiked over 70 cents since Inauguration Day. When adjusted for inflation, gasoline prices are higher now than they were during the Arab oil embargo of 1973. Last month, a cyber attack on a major oil pipeline led to shortages and something we haven't seen in decades, long lines at gas stations. And California again faces imminent power shortages and blackouts. The Sacramento Bee reports that the managers of California's electricity system can't promise that they'll be able to keep the lights on this very summer. America is returning to the energy malaise that the Energy Department was born to fix in 1977 under Jimmy Carter. Today, our committee is going to examine the Biden administration's budget and priorities for the Department of Energy. The American people face a potential energy crisis of this administration's own making. The question is, can the department help turn around the administration's disastrous policies? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. And now we turn to our guest today, Secretary Granholm, for her statement.
Thank you very much for having me, and again for that terrific visit to beautiful West Virginia earlier this month. Ranking Member Barrasso, and to the members of the subcommittee, it is an honor to be here. It's an honor to serve as the nation's 16th Secretary of Energy and to join you in discussing the President's 2022 discretionary budget for the department. I do want to start by thanking this committee for their leadership in the Energy Act of 2020. It was an amazing example of bipartisanship. It is the country's first comprehensive energy-focused legislation, as the chairman noted, since 2007, and it really did lay out a roadmap for research and development and deployment of advanced nuclear technology and carbon capture and geothermal and wind and solar and critical materials and so much more. And our budget request would allow us to make great progress in these areas. And I'm proud to report that we've actually already taken steps since January 20th. So we have invested so far $1.5 billion to strengthen our national security and accelerate progress toward a net zero economy. Much of that has gone toward improving and deploying existing market-ready energy solutions, such as our goals to cut solar in half yet again and to add 30 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2030. But at the same time, we are supporting projects that can help us unlock game-changing breakthroughs, like our new Energy Earthshots initiative. This is going to be a series of ambitious, achievable targets aimed at commercializing emerging technology, zero carbon technologies, such as hydrogen. That's the first energy Earth shot, and it will take the cost of clean hydrogen to $1 per 1 kilogram in 1 decade. That's the shot. I'd also note today that we announced today a $12 million funding opportunity to advance direct air capture technologies, and later this week we're going to be rolling out another significant investment around nuclear energy, both top priorities outlined in the budget proposal. And of course, as was noted, the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline really highlighted the urgent need for greater investment in cybersecurity. We're really actively engaged with the private sector around strategies for hardening the critical infrastructure against these evolving 21st century threats, and we are working across agencies to address vulnerabilities and strengthen domestic supply chains, like for lithium batteries. Should Congress make real the American Jobs Plan, we would be able to take much bigger steps even in all of this work. And in the meantime, our budget request would invest $46.2 billion in our key priorities. And that includes a 65% increase in funding for our Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, which is a record $1.8 billion, and a record $1.8 billion for our nuclear energy program. And that, as a base, will help us to deploy clean and cheap power on a reliable and resilient grid. And our budget is also going to enable our national labs to expand their research in clean energy and carbon reduction, while ushering in greater diversity in science, technology, engineering, and math fields. So here, let me thank the Senate for passing the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, USICA, I think is how we are pronouncing it, which authorizes the department $17 billion in support of our efforts to keep the country competitive in a global economy. So that funding, coupled with our budget request, is going to help the department and our 17 national labs put America at the forefront of clean energy innovation nationwide. And of course, the budget will also strengthen the department's nuclear security mission and our environmental management program. We've also asked for one of the highest levels of annual funding for our Office of Environmental Management to facilitate continued progress on each of the 16 sites. So all told, these investments will represent a down payment on a cleaner and more prosperous future, but truly would not be fulfilled without the American Jobs Plan, which would not only compete in the global clean energy market and confront the climate crisis, but would allow us to lift up our disadvantaged communities, tribal nations, other communities of color that have been historically burdened by pollution, and it would help the department in our ongoing work to provide fossil energy workers with real opportunities for good-paying jobs throughout the clean energy transition. So that's what it would mean to build back better. I'm humbled by the opportunity to lead the Department of Energy in these times, at this moment, and with this committee. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'll start the questioning. The Energy Act, which became law in December, included provisions that enjoyed broad bipartisan support. While the Department of Energy's budget request includes a lot of really important investment, it doesn't appear to include full funding for everything that was authorized in the Energy Act. For instance, the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program was authorized at $405 million for fiscal year 22 in the Energy Act, while the budget was $370. We also authorized $1 billion for CCUS and carbon removal, yet the fossil energy budget request for fiscal year 22 fell short with only $890, about $110 million. So do you have any thoughts on that, why they would have underfunded those?
Well, first of all, we are committed to those technologies, clearly, and it's why those technologies are included in a very big way in the American Jobs Plan. But I will note that the Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office saw a 19% increase. Our nuclear energy office saw a 23% increase from last year. We are completely committed to these, and we just want to make sure that we are prioritizing these within the context of a number, which is in the budget, the overall number.
According to the Global Energy Monitor, there are approximately 6,600 coal-fired power plants currently operating across the globe. Another 1,063 are being developed, and the majority are in Asia. China is responsible for 460 of those new plants, and 15 countries are planning to more than double their current coal fleet. The United States currently has 504, with none in development. It's clear as day to me that we need to remain focused on getting the cost of CCUS technologies down to be able to deploy them on a wide scale around the world, because fossil, as we can see, is not going away, as much as some people would like for that. That is a large part of why we authorized 6 demonstration projects in the Energy Act and specified they would be equally divided between coal, natural gas, and industrial facilities. And I mentioned in my opening statement, it's encouraging to see the President's budget beefed up spending by 61% of CCUS. He gets it, he understands. The thing I wanted to mention also, in that report, according to the IEA, 90% of the emissions growth will come from emerging countries like Asia. But those countries that are dispersing more only are spending 20% on clean energy investments. So it's up to us. If the United States does not lead in that technology through innovation and technology, these countries will not pick up the slack. So I guess I would ask, how do you see us playing that leading role to where others can follow?
Yeah, 1,000%. We need to be exporting technologies that can ensure a decarbonized future around the world, and we need to deploy them here. And this is why the American Jobs Plan has such a big commitment on demonstration projects, as you and I have discussed, both in carbon capture and in hydrogen. If we can bring the costs down, we can export this technology in partnership with other nations. That is absolutely what the President would like to see happen, and that's absolutely what our international team is working on.
As you know, budgets are a reflection of our values. When you were putting your budgets together for the state of Michigan and mine for West Virginia, we always looked at the values of what we needed. I was pleased to hear the Department of Energy's request includes funding to support the work for new interagency working groups on coal and power plant communities that have been shuttered because they've been left behind. There appears to be very little detail yet about how much funding has been set aside for these activities. So can you give me a little overview of that?
Yeah, so first of all, this year, obviously, as we are starting up this intergovernmental working group, a lot of it is pulling from agencies across the government that are already working in this area. We also saw increases, for example, as you're aware, the Intergovernmental Working Group on Coal, headed by the director of the National Energy Technology Lab in West Virginia, Brian Anderson. We see an increase in the budget for the labs, including for NETL. That's one component. But we also know that the working group is going to be pushing the very subject you and I were just talking about, which were these demonstration projects in these communities. In that working group, there are 25 communities that have been identified, 25 counties that are particularly at risk, some in a number of the states who are represented here. And we want to be able to have them benefit from these demonstration projects. And so that really is a priority for this administration.
I have one final question, and my time is about to run out. As you know, hydrogen has the potential of decarbonizing virtually all carbon-intensive sectors of our economy. I have grave concerns. I really do have great concerns about our country going to the EV that's totally dependent on foreign supply chains. So that's my concern. And with innovation technologies like CCUS and electrolyzers, we'll be able to produce it cleanly by using all of our abundant domestic energy resources. So we don't have to depend on foreign supply chains. Natural gas, renewables, nuclear, and will not require us to rely at all on supply chains. So what resources does the DOE need to put us on a path to a clean hydrogen economy?
Let me just say, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the American Jobs Plan really is the way, because there's an investment there in making sure we've got the supply chain for critical minerals, which will allow us to have electrified, where we're not reliant on China or other countries who are under China's umbrella to be able to supply us with critical minerals. We want to be able to show that we can mine in a responsible way. We want to take a look at the coal that is mined and break that open and see if there are critical minerals there that we can then use to decarbonize. There's a whole sort of circular economy around those minerals as well, which includes recycling. And in Nevada, there was just an announcement about a major company that's locating near the Tesla Gigafactory that is going to be doing recycling, and that's another 500 jobs there. So the whole notion of us being able to supply our own energy future is exactly what the president is, honestly, he's obsessed with it. He wants to make America independent of other countries for these critical aspects. The DOE and the DOD were just helping to do a whole supply chain mapping for critical minerals and batteries. It was just released. There's a national blueprint on this to make sure that the U.S. has the capability to be able to produce those.
Senator Barrasso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you, Madam Secretary. Thanks again for coming to Wyoming virtually with relationship to our announcement of the TerraPower building their first advanced nuclear reactor in my home state of Wyoming. It is big news for Wyoming, and I think for the country as well, and it's important in moving to a future with less carbon dioxide. Beginning in 2024, both TerraPower and X Energy will need high-assay, low-enriched uranium. Currently, there are only two entities capable of producing high-assay, low-enriched uranium. One is the Department of Energy, the other is Russia. What steps are you taking to ensure that TerraPower and X Energy don't have to rely on Russia to fuel these initial reactor cores?
Yeah, we agree that we need to develop that supply of HALEU, and the budget requests $33 million in that regard to start that process and make sure that we will have, on an ongoing basis, access to that critical mineral.
That's terrific, because I do understand there are some in the department who don't share that and don't want to make sufficient quantities of high-assay, low-enriched uranium available to the two companies. So that's good to hear that you're on board on this.
For sure. It goes, and I'm sorry I don't want to take your time. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it goes right into, again, this notion of us being able to make sure that we have the means for our own supply chains, for our own energy.
Speaking of our own energy, I talked about at the beginning of my opening statement about gasoline prices are up. We hear about it as we travel at home. I saw it this past weekend in Wyoming. Since President Biden has taken office, gas prices have increased about 70 cents a gallon at the pump. Should Americans expect gas prices to increase even further under the Biden administration?
Well, let's be clear about the gas prices increasing with demand. They were down last year, obviously, because of COVID, and that's when this administration took office. I haven't checked within the past week, but on average, I think the price of gas is around $3 a gallon before COVID, and it was around $3 a gallon in the year before that. So it's actually not shot up enormously, but seriously, we are obviously don't want to see people pinched at the pump for prices. It's, I think, one of the reasons why the president is concerned about making sure that there is not an increase in gas tax, because there's sensitivity to that.
Well, one of the questions that I have is obviously about a decrease in supply, which are some of the policies that are coming out of this administration. Today's Wall Street Journal, front page, Wall Street Journal today, oil hits pandemic high on bets green shift will crimp supply. So it's a supply and demand. As you said, with coronavirus behind us, we're having much more demand, and my concern is that the supply is going down. So in this story, a leading analyst is quoted as saying, this is the basis for the next oil crisis. It says, we are in uncharted territory. The article goes on to explain that demand is increasing while new production and investment is being constrained based on the administration's policies. So the question is, again, is how high are prices going to have to go before the administration will end its ban on new federal lease sales so that we can catch up with the demand, as you say, is coming back because of coronavirus?
Right. As you're aware, the lease sales are in the Department of Interior and not in the Department of Energy. But I do note that the current lease holders are able to continue to operate under their current leases while the administration evaluates what it's going to do going forward. It hasn't been, they haven't made a permanent decision. But I will say that I think that the entire world is moving toward trying to find solutions to make sure that we have reliable power, whether it's for transportation fuel for transportation or fuel for buildings and the built environment. And that's the kind of technologies that the Department of Energy is really interested in diving in on.
Yeah, because we've seen what Europe has done. They've turned to Russia for the pipeline that is bringing the gas into Germany, and we see what the United States has done, which is killing the Keystone XL pipeline. So it just seems to be a tale of two very different cities and approaches there. Finally, for years, Russia and its satellites have unfairly dumped uranium in the U.S. market. As a result, American imports, we import over 90% of our uranium from other countries. Almost 50% of it from the uranium comes from Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. For the past 2 years, America's miners produce less than half the uranium needed to fuel a single reactor. This is the lowest ever recorded in the United States. Employment in the sector is at an all-time low. In response, the previous administration requested and Congress appropriated funds to establish a strategic uranium reserve. Your budget today eliminates funding for the reserve, even though it's already been approved and appropriated. What's your plan to ensure that we don't lose America's uranium production industry? And the question is, why didn't you focus and request funding for that reserve in the budget?
I think that it had been appropriated for last year, so it's carrying over. And so now we're about to issue a request for information regarding establishing a reserve. Agree that we are going to do that, and we are, I think, this month issuing an RFI on that. So we'll be taking steps in that regard.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, great to see you this morning.
Nice to see
Obviously, Hanford is always the topic when it comes to your appearance before the Energy Committee. So wanted to ask you, in your testimony before the committee during your nomination process, you promised to ensure that the Hanford site would stay on its mission, yet the President's budget is about $900 million short from what we think will make a commitment to cleaning up Hanford during what is the track for the tri-party agreement, what people think. And again, we brought this up last week with some of the nominees. This is information that came internally from the DOE people at Hanford. This is what it's going to take. And so that site manager said we needed to spend about $3.4 billion, and someday I'll get a log for the committee of every energy secretary who's come before the committee who said, oh, boy, that's a lot of money in the budget. Let's figure out how to do it on the cheap. They never win. And by that, I mean they're never right, and it never gets done that way. We just have to live up to our commitment. So what are you going to do to live up to the commitment of the tri-party agreement and work to get this budget rectified so we know how we're going to stay on track?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. You know better than I do. The DF law, the direct feed low activity waste unit, is now under completion, and we are going to be starting that up hopefully next year or maybe in 2023. And I look forward to sort of celebrating that milestone with you. That means that there was a reduction in the budget for the construction aspect of it. We are still in negotiations on the high-level waste with the state of Washington, and so when those negotiations are finished, I look forward to coming back to you and seeing what we also need to add to the budget to account for those negotiations.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear you say that you're going to support adding something, so I'll take that for today, but I will just remind you, again, it was a site manager. I'm pretty sure that site manager knew that DF law was coming online, so I'm pretty sure they had taken that into consideration. But let's leave that in May and come back to that. Many Washingtonians were also quite upset when DOE's budget eliminated the payment in lieu of taxes funding for the Hanford and Savannah River sites. As many of my colleagues know, PILT funding is intended to compensate local governments for taxes that they cannot collect from the federal government. And when you have a site that is over 586 square miles, it's a big site. So we've heard a lot. I just don't understand. It's just kind of surprising why something such a small percentage of the Hanford budget would be eliminated. So if you could help me understand what eliminating the PILT funding is about.
I would just say that I know that historically, over time, the budget's always submitted this way, and I know Congress fills it in, and I just look forward to working with you on it.
Okay, well, I'm sure my colleagues understand PILT, so I don't have to go over it with them. We definitely will be fighting, but it'd be much better if DOE, since it's, I think,
get it.
0.2%. I'm pretty sure it didn't affect your grand scheme from a messaging perspective, and yet it's on the front page of the newspaper above the fold, which sends to a community that has worked hard for decades to not only produce something, but now clean it up, that we don't care about what it takes for them as a region to pay for education. So anyway, we'll get back to you on that point. On transmission, I see I have about a minute left. Do you agree with these recent reports about upgrading existing transmission capacity and adding new transmission lines so that we can deliver cheaper electricity more cost effectively?
Yes.
Okay, and would the ability of DOE to take a position as an anchor tenant on a new upgraded high-voltage transmission project help facilitate private sector expansion of the grid?
I'm sorry, would DOE say
Yes.
that one more time?
So if DOE, there are places where DOE could also be part of this solution, and would you think about that?
For sure.
Okay. And on, you mentioned in your testimony about the global market for clean energy products, and I know our colleagues are talking about these tax incentives that we could keep going. Do you believe that these are the kinds of incentives that are going to help us on long-haul trucks, especially for things, you know, that are very important, larger things besides cars? Do you think we should be pursuing EVs?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Daines.
Chairman Manchin, thank you. Secretary Grenholm, good to have you here. I first want to speak about critical minerals. I know the chairman brought this up already, because without them, everything we talk about today simply won't happen. It's a serious need in our country to increase responsible domestic mineral production. The U.S. is far too reliant on foreign countries like China for the minerals and raw materials used for energy, defense, healthcare, and more. We are moving in a direction where they've become the OPEC of the 70s. They could become truly a single point of failure in the supply chain for the United States and for the world if we don't start creating more domestic production. By the way, if we increase domestic production of critical minerals, we'll also have better jobs and provide important revenue to our communities. My question, and the chairman got to this a little bit, but I specifically want to talk about what DOE is going to do to promote more domestic critical mineral production. You answered him about recycling more, which again is a good thing to do. What about actually increasing domestic production?
Totally. I think both have to happen. I think it's a wraparound strategy. There has to be recycling. There has to be substitutes. But I'm holding this up because this is the national blueprint for lithium batteries, as an example, which was issued last week. I'm happy to get a copy to you, but on page 18, it talks about for these critical minerals so that we can be.
And that would be mining, right?
Yes, that would be mining. In
because we're hearing, we hear from some of these nominees coming through, as well as others in the administration, this is anti-mining, anti-natural resource development philosophy.
No, that is not the case. I think that let me give you an example. There's a DOE just funded in the last year an extraction program for lithium from brine from geothermal in the Salton Sea in California. It's a totally responsible, if you will, it's a sustainable way of mining and of being able to extract minerals. You know, this is the United States. We can mine in a responsible way, and many places are doing that. And there are some places where there's more challenges, but we can do this.
Yeah, and the reality, of course, we think about building more renewable as well traditional energy capacity. We're going to have these critical minerals, and it's got to make sure they come from the United States and not places like China, Russia. How do critical minerals, in your opinion, play in a DOE's plan for new energy production?
It absolutely is part and parcel of how we are going to be able to electrify the vehicle supply. It is part and parcel of making sure that we have the means for. I would add the supply chain for polysilicon, for solar panels as well, that we have ceded to other countries that we should be producing here. So the full stream of technology products for clean energy.
Yeah, and I hope, one of the key words used was responsible mining, and I agree with that, but I'll tell you that it can be a buzzword from the environmental extremists is saying it's only the one way we think we can do mining, and I just would hope be looking at ways here to continue to develop these God-given natural resources in our country here for our kids and our grandkids. I want to move on to CCUS, and I appreciate our conversation we've had on that topic, Madam Secretary. This committee and Congress passed bipartisan legislation to increase DOE's investment, research, and commercialization for carbon capture technology. This Bipartisan Effect Act, and I want to thank my colleague here, Senator Murkowski, as well as Senator Manchin, it was signed into law, requires large-scale demonstration projects for CCUS technology. And putting one of these pilot projects in Montana makes a lot of sense. We have the infrastructure. We've got more recoverable coal than any other state. And the jobs that a project will create are perfectly fit for the state of Montana. My question is, it's my understanding that DOE's budget does not include funding for a large-scale pilot project creating the Effect Act. What is the department doing to implement the new and very bipartisan program created by this committee?
Yeah, love the bipartisan program created by this committee, and the funding would, you would see these projects in the American Jobs Plan or whatever is being negotiated. I mean, we need to do a lot of them. They're very large, they're very expensive, but we need to do them to be able to take this technology to scale and to do the research that's necessary to lower the cost. So I hope we're able to do that.
Yeah, and as we think about going forward here, electric demand is going to keep going up. As we think about this conversion here to more electric vehicles, we've got to find base load. And I tell you what, we've got a great example of that, frankly, with coal. CCUS, I think, is a great marriage. What specific actions should I tell my Montana communities that they need to do to help ensure a CCUS project pilot would come to a place like Montana?
Maybe they should contact their senator and have him support the American Jobs Plan. I'm just saying, I think that there is a huge opportunity where there, I really do, and all kidding aside, I just think that for many here who care about these technologies, there are these demonstration projects in key communities, and I think there's a couple of counties that in Montana that were part of this intergovernmental working group on coal that would qualify for being considered as a priority investment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Heinrich.
Welcome, Secretary. If we want to increase critical mineral production, wouldn't that be a good opportunity to update the 1872 Mining Act, which is now 149 years old, in order to make sure that we are actually doing this responsibly?
I assume so.
And would electrifying passenger transportation, would that help American consumers finally break free of the sort of ball and chain of high gasoline prices?
It would. We have to continue to do work
When you
to
look
bring
on a
down the
cents,
cost.
when you look at a cents per mile approach
Absolutely.
to electrifying homes and businesses, I know that's something that you're looking in the president's climate goals. But historically, we have really over-relied on tax credits to create incentives to do that kind of work. And a lot of my constituents, for example, just don't have tax liability, so they can't really they can't necessarily take advantage of tax credits. You know, one of the ideas that has gained a lot of traction is shifting that to a point-of-sale rebate that would open up that incentive structure to many low-income Americans. Would you be willing to work with myself, with this committee, on new ways to incentivize the electrification of our homes and businesses?
Absolutely.
Does the U.S. have a clear blending standard for hydrogen transport in our existing infrastructure and what is currently largely carrying methane and net fossil gas?
We're looking at that and researching what that blending standard might be, and working with other agencies and state regulators too to see what that might look like, because I think it's an important strategy.
I think it would be incredibly helpful to have a safe standard set today so that all of this investment can be unlocked and can utilize, at least in the early stages, the existing gas infrastructure. And as you mentioned, there's a huge amount of overlap of potential responsibility from many different agencies with respect to permitting natural gas or permitting hydrogen. And it's not clear to me even that if you were to switch over to transporting hydrogen in the same in the same infrastructure that you might need a brand-new permit. So is DOE doing the work to sort of bring all those agencies
Yes.
together
Yes.
and figure out what that's going to look
That's
like?
part of our hydrogen shot. You know, we got the research side, and we also have the deployment side. And so, yeah, our hydrogen technologies office is looking at that.
Yeah, I think that the sooner we have that, the sooner we'll be able to really attract the capital to make those changes. As you're probably aware, a number of states across the Southeast and the West have been, that there's a renewed interest in really expanding wholesale electricity markets, ISO and RTO markets. Organized wholesale electricity markets really help bring down costs for consumers. And one of the things that there seems to be a real need for is simply specific initiatives and increased support and assistance to states to be able to thoughtfully expand those markets. Is that something that you, as Secretary, that the department would be willing to work with this committee to really incentivize the expansion of those markets?
Absolutely.
Great. Transmission investment tax credit, that's something that the president rolled out in his American Jobs Plan. How important is that to really building out a modern grid?
It's hugely important. As you know, a lot of transmission is built on spec, or they don't build on spec.
They build
They
on-
want to make sure that they have offtake, and so we have to absorb some of that risk in order to get the level of build-out that is necessary for our needs. There's right now over 600 gigawatts of request for backed up for a grid that doesn't exist yet.
Right. I want to thank you for being so succinct, because I don't think I've ever gotten through this many questions on this committee. And I'll just leave you with one last thought in my remaining seconds. The NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is currently assessing whether to give a private corporation a 40-year license to construct and operate an interim storage facility in New Mexico. And as I've discussed with you in the past, unless DOE fulfills its statutory responsibility to provide permanent waste disposal, interim sites can become permanent sites. That is not something that my state has signed up for. And so myself, along with other New Mexico elected leaders, are going to be sending you a letter describing our concerns more in detail, and I would just appreciate you taking a look at those.
Will do.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Hickenlooper has to go preside, and I want to thank Senator Langford for being so gracious and allowing you to have your questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Senator Langford. I will be concise and brief. And Madam Secretary, thank you so much for your work and for being willing to undertake this grueling interrogation. I've got to make sure I get to first energy laboratories in Golden, Colorado. Obviously, the scientists and engineers there have been making great contributions to advancing us in all of the above energy scenarios. And in terms of DOE's budget, I wanted to thank you for increasing the funding for the NREL's facilities and infrastructure, particularly for the energy materials and processing at scale facility, the MAPS. And I wanted to, make sure I invited you to come visit this facility as they're looking at this changing scale, and B, to make sure we can stay in touch with this.
I would love to.
Great. And again, easy, short answer. In terms of, and some of this, the previous questions addressed, but as we electrify various sectors of our economy, and we're going to change how we supply and demand electricity, many of our current regulations, really for how we charge for power, that's more specific, I think are going to prove poorly suited to as these markets evolve. And do you see a role for DOE and the national labs in trying to help resolve and inform policymakers? So many of these are done on a state level. So
yes, I mean, I would say that NREL is particularly well suited to help model out, as well as the Pacific Northwest National Lab, who works in conjunction with NREL. That's what they're so good at doing, is that kind of modeling. But I agree with you that our electricity sector is changing based upon more electrification, and we need to take a look at how we charge for that, including demand response.
Right, exactly. And then also the in the goal of, as an ex-geologist, we always refer to make sure we have multiple working hypotheses as you're trying to solve problems, doing a number of different research. And obviously, the direct air capture technologies are potentially game-changing scenarios, obviously controversial in some ways, but they do set a ceiling on the cost of solving climate change, because I think every ton of carbon emissions that we create now, as the price comes down for actually taking carbon out of the air, it makes more sense if as that price comes down, we have a broader array of choices in terms of how we generate electricity. And I thought I'd just check and see what your long-term strategy is, specifically around direct air capture.
Yeah, I mentioned in my opening statement, I know that you arrived a little bit late, but that actually today we announced a funding opportunity announcement for direct air capture, a $15 million opportunity. So we really are very much interested in seeing where this goes. 15 million is small in the scheme of how much sometimes these big projects cost, but it will allow us to identify the best places and the best private sector partners to be able to team with.
Right, exactly. And I think that so many of all of our energy sources, we don't face the externalities. In other words, the costs down the road we will have to, as a society and as a planet, will have to deal with. And I think that's part of, when you begin to look at those externalities, in certain ways, as we begin to address that, I guess that the IMF estimated $650 billion a year between all the various carbon, the fossil fuel energy generation. Somehow we've got to really address that as well. And you guys see any way that the IMF, we can begin to address that discrepancy to make sure we get the full benefits of our investments for the American economy?
Yes, and I think the budget that we're presenting, plus the President's American Jobs Plan, really does double down on investing in the clean energy technologies that would allow us to arrive at the promised land.
Right, I couldn't agree more. Okay, I yield back the time to the
Senator Langford, thank you, sir.
You bet. Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's good to see you again. Let me back up into a philosophical conversation a little bit with you. As I go through the budget, it's clear, more money. That's a pretty clear aspect to the budget, is that in almost every area, increase, some of them by very, very large percentages, 300, 400% increase from previous time periods. So I see all that. But there's also, seems to be a philosophical shift as well on how we're handling carbon. It's not reducing it, it is eliminating, and it's a jump there. So let me give you, for instance, it seems to move for transportation, fuel to electric vehicles, skipping through the hybrid that obviously make an enormous difference. Skipping away from natural gas and other things to say, well, how do we find something to skip over this instead of a transition from home heating oil? For instance, all my friends in the Northeast use a lot of home heating oil that produces a lot more carbon than we do in the Midwest using natural gas. But it seems to try to make the jump. Is that a philosophical shift? Am I picking up something here that it goes from all or nothing without a transition in between?
No, I think that the recognition that there needs to be a transition is really quite loud in the sense that the technologies that will help us to transition are really supported by this administration. Whether it's carbon capture, we're not skipping over. What we want to do is to assist natural gas, for example, in removing greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's carbon dioxide or methane. We want to assist the baseload fuel power sector to remove those technologies so that they can still function, but in a zero carbon environment. So it's not skipping over, it's assisting and decarbonizing.
Right, so when I look at your plan, you've got a 2035 for electricity generation to be at zero carbon, is that correct?
Right.
So the permitting question comes into that for me initially. 14 years away at this point to say we'll be at a zero carbon within 14 years. I look at the Trans-West transmission line and the permitting they've gone through. The transmission lines that's taken wind power through several states in the Northwest. That process started in 2007.
Yeah.
They have yet to break ground on it yet. So they've been permitting since 2007, permitting. They hope to break ground on it next year. 15, 16 years in the process from permitting to starting it. You're talking about in 14 years being at net zero.
Net zero by 2050.
So what's the
2035 is
2035?
100% clean electricity.
For transmission?
For transmission is 2035, yeah, 100% clean electricity.
Right, so that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
This is a
but you're
transmission project.
completely right about the permitting issue. Completely right that it is way too long, and it's very frustrating. And we have got a team internally that is working on that. It's got to be an intergovernmental strategy, obviously, because we don't do, DOE doesn't do permitting, but there is a recognition that we've got to move with alacrity.
Right, but that brings up the philosophical issue for me, because it seems to be a lot more money to be able to do more innovation, more creativity, more grants. Let's figure this out. But the practical side of it is, okay, if we figure that out, how do we actually implement that? When we talk about nuclear power and trying to be able to implement nuclear power, putting one in Wyoming, that's a very long permitting stream to be able to get there, to actually get that on the ground. If you're going to put a transmission line in the northwest of the United States, and it takes 15 years to do the permitting on it, setting a date of 2035 saying we're going to innovate to be able to do that and actually implementing it is a very, very different animal.
Yes, I agree. But the whole premise of the investments is that we create a grid development authority inside of the Department of Energy, where it is where you have both planning, permitting, and paying overseen, so that you can make sure that the investments are proceeding quickly. That's through the American Jobs Plan.
How would that work with Department of Interior, BLM, all of those?
Well, we would work with them. Obviously, there's intergovernmental processes to be able to do that, and we would have to make sure that all of our partners are at the table.
Another issue we've talked about several times here is about the critical earth, rare earth elements as well,
Yeah.
to figure out how we actually get that. The biggest challenge that we have there is the permitting side of that as well. Obviously, those resources are here. They are obviously in high demand. But we've got lots of issues there. One of the things that I've raised is the Title 17 loan guarantee program that Energy has, and to be able to put a greater priority on that program, on the development of domestic. Would you be open to have the Title 17 loan guarantee program be more focused on domestic production of critical earth?
Yes, I think we may need a statutory language change, but absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Rono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I just wanted to note that, yes, there have been concerns raised about communities being left behind as we move toward a clean energy future, and President Biden has stated his commitment to target federal investments in disadvantaged communities, and I think it is important that we ensure that people are not left out of the transition. So on June 23rd, committee hearing on this topic, so I wanted to make note of that. Secretary Granholm, the President's budget request supports long-term research, but it also recognizes the need for rapid demonstration and commercialization of clean energy technologies. And renewable power is already the cheapest option in many places, but we need to accelerate the use of low-carbon energy and cleaner transportation and manufacturing if we are to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Can you briefly describe the importance of rapidly commercializing newer and cheaper low-carbon technologies like battery storage, and how would the budget's proposed Office of Clean Energy demonstrations help in this effort?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, we have a significant increase in our Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy for the purpose of accelerating deployment. And that's really what we have tasked all of our offices to do, is to say, you have done a fantastic job of exercising the muscle of doing research and doing development, and now we've got to deploy, especially technologies that we know are well established. And so that's why you see that significant increase in the budget.
And I'm glad you noted that the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy is being beefed up, because during the Trump years, that office was cut rather significantly. Relating to a clean energy standard, 30 states plus the District of Columbia have renewable electricity standards, including Hawaii's standard of 100% renewable energy by 2045, and I have supported a national standard to give a clear sign that electric utilities and other power providers need to speed up their investments in clean and affordable sources of power and help tackle climate change. Can you describe how the President's plan for a clean energy standard, well, not how, but can you describe the plan and how it would benefit people in their homes and businesses?
Yeah, the President has a goal and would like to see, and it's included in the American Jobs Plan, of 100% clean electricity by 2035 and net zero carbon emissions by 2050. If there were a national standard, you would see states organizing around these goals, which would mean that individuals in states would be able to benefit from, say, energy efficiency, which on average, with electric light bulbs and with efficient appliances, citizens save about $1,000 a year, and would be able to install solar panels. Every state's a little bit different. So it might mean community solar, it might mean net metering. Some states are different than others, but the bottom line is energy freedom, if you will, a clean energy freedom would occur in all across the country if we were able to pass a renewable energy standard. And I would say that clean energy, as defined in that standard, would include energies like nuclear energy, et cetera. It's not just wind and solar, but it's other clean energies that would be included within that standard.
I'm glad you mentioned appliances. That's my next question. Under the previous administration, the DOE failed to meet deadlines to update approximately 28 different appliance standards, such as for refrigerators and clothes dryers. A report by the Appliance Standards Awareness Project found that updates to national appliance standards could save average households hundreds of dollars in their utility bills while significantly cutting carbon pollution emissions. What has the DOE done this year, or plan to do this year, to address the backlog of appliance energy standards?
Yes, we are going back at that. We've filed, I think, 27 of the 28 notices in the Federal Register to indicate that we are reinstating those standards.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, hello.
Hey.
I yield back my time.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Marshall's recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Madam Secretary, to our committee hearing here. Worldwide, if we instituted E15 right now, we could decrease tailpipe emissions by almost 50%. That's technology we have available today. We had it available yesterday. In your budget proposal, the 45Q tax credit is eliminating ethanol, natural gas, and ammonia as well. Can you kind of explain, walk us through why you're excluding specifically ethanol as well as natural gas and ammonia from that 45Q tax credit?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I don't know. I'm not read in on that particular piece, so I'll follow.
Next, I want to talk about for small oil and gas producers, will the President's budget remove the percentage depletion tax credit and the intangible drilling cost deduction? And again, this would impact only small oil producers.
You know, again, I am not familiar with that, so I will follow up with you on that as well.
Okay, both of those tax credits are what allows small producers to stay in business. Without it, we might as well just hand our natural oil production over to the big companies. It's certainly the difference between a small producer being able to stay in business or not. Next, let's turn to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Is there any interest in the Department of Energy to enlarge it, and what are you doing to protect it from cyber attacks?
Actually, what we have done, I appreciate you raising this, is because it is obviously an important, it's an important tool to be able to have at our disposal during emergencies. And so we have put the Strategic Petroleum Reserve under the Office of CSER, the Cybersecurity Office, because we want to connect the two to make the CSER office more of an emergency response office and elevate it to ensure that it has all of the tools necessary to protect us in the event of an energy crisis.
Okay, thank you. I think you probably agree with me that energy is a national security issue. It's a tool that we can use to help or harm our allies or our enemies. I'm especially prioritizing our relationships with the Quad, Australia, Japan, and India. There's certainly an opportunity to help our ally India with natural gas and expanding our natural gas to those. How do you feel about the Department of Energy's plan to strengthen that energy partnership with India, specifically as it pertains to natural gas exports to them?
Yeah, I'm very interested in continuing to ensure that India and the United States have a strong partnership, and there are a lot of energy tools that can help India achieve its own goals, which are very aggressive as well. With respect to natural gas and liquefied natural gas, which as an export, which I assume is what you're referring to, obviously the Department of Energy has the authority and the obligation under the Natural Gas Act to approve those requests. I am really interested, though, in the technologies, as are our global allies, in the technologies that eliminate methane and reduce methane from natural gas pipelines, production, and combustion. And that strategy is another strategy that we're working on inside of the Department of Energy to make sure that we can have natural gas that is carbon-free.
Yeah, certainly we're excited about making traditional energies cleaner as well, and I think that will be technology-driven as well. Has your department considered trying to understand the total environmental impact of an electric car from cradle to grave, and what the impact of making our entire transportation industry electric, what that would have on the grid? How much larger would the grid have to be?
It would have to be significantly larger. There would need to be a lot additional capacity, and there already is a need for additional capacity even without that. So this is why investment in the transmission system, both for capacity purposes as well as cyber purposes, as well as resiliency purposes, is necessary. Our grid is not sufficient right now, and we absolutely need additional investment in it.
Okay. We'll come back to the cradle-to-grave issue on the electric cars and what their environmental impact is. Right now, I think the ranking member emphasized that we're importing more oil from Russia than we are from Alaska right now. The policies of your administration have caused the price of gasoline to increase at the pump. I'm very concerned that your policies are going to increase the price of utilities for people. Would you agree with me that that creates a social injustice? And where does the concept of affordable energy fit into your policies going forward?
Clearly, we want to see affordable energy. Clearly, there are communities that are facing energy poverty because of the percentage of their income that is tied to heating their homes. Largely, often that happens in poorer communities and in communities of color, and we really want to make sure that that does not happen. It's why we need to really propel, for example, energy efficiency in communities that won't otherwise be able to afford it, so that they don't have that burden, that energy burden upon them.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. I now recognize Secretary Granholm. Great to see you today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I understand that one of your goals is to increase energy efficiency in federal buildings, and I believe that demand response programs should be part of that effort. Last summer, a regional heat wave caused California to implement rolling blackouts. That affected Arizona. We often have to go to California when we are short on electrical capacity during a surge. But Arizona was able to keep its lights on and air conditioners running because our major utility companies offer voluntary programs that remotely dial down thermostats during hours of unusually high electricity demand. They used that last summer. It's very effective. This week in Tucson, Arizona, where I live, where Gabby and I live, it was every day is going to be above 110 degrees. In Phoenix, every day this week above 115. We need this technology. It's very helpful. So could we work together to expand DOE's energy efficiency initiatives to promote demand response programs?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I understand that the budget, this is a totally different subject, tribal energy programs, understand that the budget proposes to electrify roughly 33,000 homes in tribal communities. About half of those homes, 15,000 of them, are on the Navajo Nation. I want to help achieve that important goal. I also want to help DOE bring renewable energy projects to tribes. Tribal communities in my state have tremendous solar and wind potential that could be scaled up to commercial levels. About 10 years ago, Congress and DOE established a $2 billion tribal energy loan guarantee program for tribally owned renewable energy projects. But not a single loan has been issued under this program, not one. Do you have any idea why this is?
Well, I do know this. I know that over the past 4 years, no loans were issued under any of the programs under the Loan Program Office. And I do know we are reversing that. And so this year so far, our Loan Programs Office has met with at least 20 interested entities to be able to take the tribal loan funding. And so stay tuned, because we really want to make sure that this money gets out for the purposes that you described.
Well, great. I'm going to have my office reach out so we can get the information as these loans are approved, and I'm hopeful that you'll be willing to work with me and other tribal leaders so we can get this program moving along.
Great.
And I've got 2 more minutes. So, Secretary Granholm, I want to discuss hydrogen and nuclear energy a bit here. In Arizona, we are home to the largest nuclear power plant in the country, the Palo Verde generating station. And Palo Verde runs a pilot program that produces hydrogen from water using electrolysis when there's excess nuclear power during the day when solar generation is occurring. This hydrogen is used to supplement peaking natural gas plants important to grid reliability. And it can be configured to produce hydrogen for fuel cells as well. So are you familiar with the hydrogen pilot program at Palo Verde?
I am. I'm very excited about it.
Yep.
There's one like this in Minnesota and in Ohio, too.
Yeah, very exciting, and it has great potential.
And could be in a number of other states as well.
Could be. And we would like to see that expanded across the country, and we'd like to continue to work with you and your staff at DOE and partner on expanding this program.
Great.
Thank you. And I now recognize Senator Murkowski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, good to see you. Thank you for being here. I appreciated the conversation that several of my colleagues have had on the issue of critical minerals. It was raised by the ranking member, Senator Barrasso, by Senator Daines. I think Senator Lankford hit on it. But I really feel very, very strongly that in the effort to go in the direction that this administration is clearly taking with the emphasis on renewables, making sure that we are paying a keen eye, paying close attention with a keen eye to this issue. Of course, this from. You cite an IEA report that electric vehicles require 6 times the mineral inputs of a conventional car, and an onshore wind plant requires 9 times the mineral resources than a comparable gas plant. So we're going to have to get it from somewhere. And I was really pleased when Senator Daines, in pressing you a little bit further about where we get it, you used the word mining. I appreciate the focus on recycling. I know we need to be doing more. I'm working with several of my colleagues on that. But I think we need to remember that before we can recycle, we have to cycle it in the first place. So we've got to get those minerals from somewhere. I read an article, this was in March or so. It was just before the administration had convened some meeting with our Canadian partners, focusing on alliances with mineral resources. And I was a little disturbed because the Reuters article basically said that we're viewing Canada as our 51st state when it comes to minerals production and opportunities. We come from a state where we're blessed with extraordinary natural resources. We've got some great mining opportunities. We've got a facility that we're looking at down in the southeastern part of the state that will not only be a source of critical minerals, but also heavy rare earths. And we're looking to site a processing facility right there in that region. It's really quite exciting. But we have to have the ability to move forward with these mines. So you recognize the issues as they relate to processing. I want to make sure that we're focusing all of the spectrum here when it comes to these critical minerals.
Yeah, full value chain, for sure, from extraction to processing. That's amazing because we process nothing in the United
Exactly.
States. We send our stuff to other countries to
We
be able
have
to do
one
it.
facility in California, and we
Right.
still send it to China.
We
It
should be
makes no
doing
sense.
the whole thing, soup to nuts.
Well,
the
we've
whole
got
chain.
an opportunity for you to look at, so
Great.
excited to
Okay.
share that with you. You also mentioned in response to Senator Marshall, where you are with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This is something that I have focused on for a long period of time. Senator Cantwell, when we were teaming at the committee here, Senator Manchin, we had really focused on a modernization plan for the SPR, making sure that in the event that this is needed at times of emergency, it's ready to go. You basically just push send. We directed a lot of funding, actually, towards the modernization plan. Do you have an update on where we are with that?
I don't, but I'll get it to you.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. And then with the loan program, the Title 17 loan program you were talking about with Senator Lankford here, we had in our Energy Act put in place some required reforms with regards to the LPO and the loan guarantees. You just said in response to him that you think you might need to make some statutory changes as we're focusing on domestic programs for this loan. So what am I missing here?
Yeah,
Is there something that we didn't do within the Energy Act?
What I was referring to is the loan program obviously focuses on advanced technologies, and there's a question about whether mining would fall within the definition. We're actually having our general counsel take a look at this because I'm concerned that we may get a challenge without clarity. But it was just on the mining piece of things.
Okay. Then last point that I wanted to raise with you, and I've got some other questions that I'll submit to the record. You will be receiving, if you have not already received it, an invitation to come and see what I think is one of Alaska's great, exciting renewable energy opportunities. And this is the development of a geothermal facility located down on the Aleutian Islands, just outside of the community of Unalaska. It's our nation's largest fishing port, the Mucushin volcano. This project would be extraordinary in not only being able to supply a community that's 100% reliant on diesel fuel, but also being able to help power up facilities for our fishing, for the trade, the commercial opportunities that we have there. I think it really is an opportunity to showcase some things. So we're looking at this. It's a 30-megawatt geothermal project. It doesn't come cheap just because you are out there really at the end of the world, that the department can look at projects like this that, while they're located in a segment of the country that is beyond description. When you try to say rural, we're beyond rural. But this is something that we look at as an opportunity for national importance, and I'd like to be able to educate you more on this project if you have not already been briefed, and of course invite you to Alaska to see not only that, but our renewable energy opportunities that we have around the state.
Great, great. I would love it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Now recognize Senator Cortez Masto for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Granholm, it's great to see you again. I want to start by thanking you for your recent visit to Southern Nevada. I know everyone was excited that you were there, and I think we were just as excited that you were seeing our solar fields, to UNLV's winning Mojave Bloom Solar Home, all the cutting-edge projects that are happening, and that's why I call it the Innovation State. Thank you for your shout-out with our battery recycling, our critical minerals and supply chains, and I'm going to get to that. But the first thing I want to also talk about is Yucca Mountain. I was pleased to hear, again, your comments about Yucca Mountain and the need to incorporate the framing and findings of the 2012 Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future. And for my colleagues, if we are going to go down clean energy path into the administration with nuclear power, we have to address the issue of the waste that is out there. and Yucca Mountain is not the answer. But I do have a solution, and the delegation from Nevada has a solution, which is the Nuclear Waste Informed Consent Act. That is the first step in making sure everybody is on the same page and moving forward in how we address the waste in this country. So let me ask you this question, because in regards to the department's fiscal year 2022 budget request, the DOE will support a consent-based siting approach and actively work with state, tribal, and local governments, as well as other affected federal agencies, to better understand and consider concerns and challenges before making decisions. So, Secretary, can you elaborate on this statement a little bit and provide an update on the department's efforts to carry out a consent-based approach?
Right. In the budget, there's a $20 million hold there for this process, because we want to begin this process, which will happen next month. We'll start the process, and hopefully in the fall we'll be able to gather and see what the interest is. As you're well aware, we're not authorized to be able to do a permanent solution, so it would be an interim inquiry. But you can't force this on any community. There has to be a process of consent and presumably rewarding the communities that are willing to raise their hands. So we'll see what comes back, but this administration has made it very clear that Yucca Mountain is not the solution.
Thank you. And in the spirit of collaboration, and let's talk a little bit about critical minerals, because this is something else that if you were in Nevada, you saw this, and I appreciate your comments here, because I do think it is important as we go down the clean energy future that we are recognizing that there are critical minerals within our communities, within this country, that we should be looking at for extraction and processing and bringing that supply chain here. And you talked a little bit about that. I think it is important that as we look at a critical mineral extraction, though, we are also recognizing there is a way to still protect the environment and bring all the stakeholders in a collaborative nature, so everybody's working on the same page. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you raised this, it's a great example, because there are a couple of potential opportunities in Nevada, as you are well aware, and you can do this in a way that includes the community and that listens to the concerns that people may have of both the environment as well as tribal lands, for example. And do something in partnership that includes perhaps a community benefit agreement where you work together on what everybody wants to see, which is the ability to create jobs in a sustainable and responsible way, powering our future with clean technology.
Thank you. And that's why, again, I will extend an invitation to the chairman of our committee here to come out to Nevada to see how we have incorporated mining in an environmentally responsible way, because I think it can be done. Let me ask you, for purposes of my colleague Senator Kelly's question on tribes, please know that's a concern of mine as well, particularly as we both sit on the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. This is something we keep bringing up. It is a concern for ours to make sure our tribes have energy loan guarantee program, and we're doing everything we can to promote their economic opportunities as well as we go down the clean energy path. One thing I want to bring to your attention, though, is this nexus between energy and water. As you well know, in the West, there is a drought situation happening, particularly as we all are dealing with how we manage our growth, our economic development, and clean energy future, and the water situation that we see in the West. So for these reasons, I introduced the Energy and Water Research Integration Act last Congress. Portions of this legislation were ultimately merged with former Chairwoman Murkowski, who's really taken the lead on the nexus of energy and water sustainability, and she has introduced legislation around that space. Let me ask you this. In the legislation, it established an interagency committee led by the Secretaries of Energy and the Interior to coordinate and collaborate on energy-water nexus activities. Can you speak to the status of this section and how it will complement our D&D priorities included throughout DOE's fiscal year 2022 budget request?
Can I get back to you on that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator King is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Governor, welcome.
Thank you.
I call you governor because there's only one political honorific in this country that's higher than governor, and it ain't senator or secretary. So I'm delighted to have you here. Pipeline security. I count we've got PHMSA at the Department of Transportation, we've got TSA at Homeland Security, we've got FERC, and we've got Department of Energy, all have a piece of pipeline. This is unacceptable. Do you agree with me that we have to rationalize the process of cybersecurity for pipelines so that there's one agency that's in charge, that there are regulations, that it's not voluntary? This is a part of our critical infrastructure.
It would be wise to do so.
Thank you. That's exactly what I hoped you would respond. I just want to emphasize, right now, we're in danger. I mean, the Colonial Pipeline was a wake-up call. We keep not waking up. And pipelines in New England, for example, 60% of our electricity comes from natural gas. All of the natural gas comes through pipelines. So as far as I'm concerned, gas pipelines are part of the grid. And the grid has a great deal of regulation and testing and cybersecurity. It's very, very weak in terms of the pipeline system. So I hope we can work together with CISR and other agencies to figure out where this should reside and to get on it promptly.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm encouraged at least by the fact that TSA is now requiring pipelines to notify us when there is an effort at penetration from a ransomware attack. But there are basic standards that have been developed by NIST at the Department of Commerce, which the electrical sector uses.
Exactly, and those standards should apply to pipelines, and pipelines should be pen tested, and they should be under the strictest structure. Nuclear waste we've talked about, Senator Cortez Masto. I just want to emphasize that we do have to face that issue. Yeah. This is a broken promise by the federal government going back to the 50s, where we developed a commercial nuclear infrastructure in the country. The commitment was, we'll take care of the waste. It hasn't happened. In my state, in many states, we've got what amount to 100 high-level nuclear waste sites scattered around the country, including one in Maine. And so I urge you to take this seriously, because I want to support the development of nuclear power as a clean alternative, but I don't feel that I can morally if we're shipping the waste problem to our children.
Yeah, I get it. And that's why we're proceeding on it this year.
CISR, I mentioned. CESER.
CISR.
CISR, okay. Render unto Caesar. You've indicated you want to strengthen the agency, but I'm concerned about the leadership and that it's at the career level rather than a higher level political appointee. Is that something you could consider in terms of elevating the status and significance of that agency?
Yeah, and I appreciate you writing me the letter on that, and I know that I have recently responded. And here's what we're considering. And again, I want to work with you on it, but you know, since CISR, about half of its existence has been without leadership because it's been a political appointee. And the question is, this is an emergency operation, sort of akin to, you know, an emergency response entity that is non-political. It is not partisan. What we'd like to do is to strengthen CISR by elevating it to be a directorate position, but not subject to who's in and who's out, a professional group that is trusted. So the new person that we have appointed to be head of CISR, Push Kumar, I hope you get a chance to meet him. He's a total pro, has experience both in the utility side as well as inside of the federal government. And he is looking at all the ways that we can strengthen CISR within the Department of Energy. But I tell you, you know, we've worked really hard to try to fill the slots because once you have a political leadership, sometimes people aren't sure about whether they're in, they're out.
I understand.
We want to make it a career profession.
Well, I just want to be sure that it gets the status that it needs and deserves.
Yes.
Final, very brief question. In your budget, you zero out the heating oil reserve. As the state with the highest level of heating oil usage in the nation, that's, of course, of grave concern. Are you planning to sell off the reserve, or does the reserve stay? You're not adding to it? What are the contingencies? Because we keep thinking things aren't going to happen, and then they happen. And my state would be a catastrophe if something happened to the heating oil supply.
Yeah, I understand that, and I certainly, you know, would want to make sure that we're prepared for something like that. I think initially the thought was that that reserve has been in place for 20 years and it's never once been used. Then when the Colonial Pipeline thing happened, even though it wasn't used then, we said, okay, so we've got enough to be able to carry through the middle of 2022. Happy to work with you on making sure that it's solid after that.
Please do. Thank you. Thank you.
You bet.
Madam Secretary and Governor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor.
And Senator Barrasso for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I'm just kind of looking through a number of different things here. You know, you're working to convince Congress to mandate a carbon-free power sector by 2030 for the entire nation, and that's the policy of the administration. 2035, okay. California has gone down this path with disastrous results. California's goal is actually 10 years later than the Biden administration. So last month, the National American Electric Reliability Corporation issued its 2021 Summer Reliability Assessment. This is what they said. Quote, California is at risk of energy emergencies during periods of normal peak summer demand and high risk, they said, when above normal demand is widespread in the West. Well, California is the only state determined to be at high risk. It also has among the highest electricity prices in our nation. Should we expect more blackouts in California this summer?
I don't know whether there will be, but I do know that obviously the climate impacts of a heated planet are really impacting California disproportionately, and the West. These other states that are experiencing 117-degree temperatures, and we've got to do something about that as well. Clearly, we have to have reliable power. Clearly, we have to have reliable baseload power. And so the question is, from the place we call the Department of Solutions, how do we invest in the technologies that will get us there to make sure that we've got affordable, reliable baseload power that is clean?
And it's a global reduction in carbon that we're looking for to have the impact that you described.
Of course.
Globally. So last week, the Wall Street Journal ran an article titled, China slows bid to cut emissions. China slows their bid to cut emissions. The article explains that China's top economic planners have put the brakes on attempts by the environmental officials in China to reduce carbon emissions, as they say, driving growth takes priority in China over meeting climate targets. So meanwhile, our administration, the Biden administration, has dramatically increased U.S. commitments to cut greenhouse emissions. But globally, we cut, China adds more, helps their economy, hurts us economically. To that end, President Biden has already killed thousands of American jobs in the oil and gas sector alone. China is prioritizing its own economic growth. I mean, Madam Secretary, is China just playing us for fools?
Well, I think we are taking a strong position as a nation against China's continued increasing their investments in coal. That's leading at the G7 to stop financing those kinds of investments, to make sure that the G7 is united in making that happen. But I would say that, all of our G7 allies, not just the G7, but our global allies, all want solutions that are cleaner. Everybody does. And so the question is, if you're going to get your power from a country or your technologies from a country that may be, where the power may be dirty or where the products were produced with, for example, Uyghur labor, then we are missing a global market opportunity in this country by not producing those products here, exporting them to countries that really want to see clean energy. So we want to take advantage of that.
Yeah, you said we have a strong position. I just want to make sure it's not dangerously naive, as we may be being played by fools as China continues with their emissions going up, either as the United States emissions go down. Global emissions are going up as long as China and India continue to produce carbon dioxide at the rate and level they are.
And they have also made pledges, and the world is pressuring them, not just the United States. So we've got to continue to work on this and apply whatever pressure we can to ensure that they live up to their commitments.
They're not living up to the pledges that they made, which are less real than the pledges and less reliable than what we've seen the rest of the world do. So earlier this month, the White House, so there's a question on critical minerals, because we've discussed critical minerals, and this will be my last question, Mr. Chairman. Earlier this month, the White House issued a supply chain report which addressed critical minerals. The report says the United States should only consider mining, this is from the White House, where demand can't be met through alternative means and secondary sources. The report also recommends that Congress, EPA, and the Department of Interior impose additional regulations on mining. The United States gets about 80% of its rare earth minerals and compounds from China. You rightly pointed out that the Uyghurs are being used for forced labor. We see some rare earth minerals coming from the Congo where child labor is being used, and then those chemicals, those minerals are being processed in China. So whether it's forced labor with the Uyghurs, whether it's child labor in the Congo, this is China's fingerprint all over it. So does President Biden believe it's more important to reduce mining in the United States or to increase mining in the United States so we can get these critical minerals in ways that are more responsibly obtained,
right,
and we're not as dependent on these other nations?
So on the last week, this national blueprint for lithium batteries was issued, and on page 18, it says that our near-term objectives up to 2025 include increasing U.S. safe and sustainable production capacity of critical battery minerals, including lithium, nickel, and cobalt, by supporting R&D and mining efforts. So,
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now recognize Senator Hoeven for 5 minutes.
Is it, or Senator King? Okay, thank you, Mr.
We were waiting for you. We want to listen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and Secretary, great to see you. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Do you see carbon capture and storage as key to reducing CO2 emissions while producing low-cost, dependable energy for our country?
I do.
So tell me how you can help us do it. I call it cracking the code. You and I have talked about it, but what do you think are the key things that you can do as Secretary of Ag, so you can tell I was in an ag hearing, Secretary of Energy, to actually do it, you know, to actually make it happen on the ground? What are the keys?
Yeah, I mean, consistent with what you all passed, the Energy Act of 2020, you all said we need some demonstration projects. And honestly, we need to have the funding for these larger scale demonstration projects that would take carbon capture and prove it out, as well as hydrogen and other means of being able to reduce CO2. Those demonstration projects are, I know, what is part of what is being negotiated now, and it certainly was contemplated by the President in the American Jobs Plan. That's what needs to happen.
So there are three things that I'd suggest. The front-end investment, because you have to put, now particularly what we're working on, as you know, well known in North Dakota, is cracking the code on carbon capture for coal-fired electric. Mm-hmm. Three keys there: help with the front-end investment, things like Project Tundra, which we're already doing, our state, our industry, and you, Department of Energy. The loan investment they'll make and the equipment they'll put on the plant, as well as putting the equipment for taking the CO2 downhole. And then the enhanced tax credits, 45Q and 48A. So would you agree that those are three keys, and are you willing to help actually advance those three as making this happen?
Yes, yes.
Great.
And they're contemplated in the American Jobs Plan too, including the increased tax credit.
Well, and a lot, yeah. Well, actually, a lot of them are in place, the enhanced tax credit. You know, we're appreciative that it's in there and in other proposed legislation, including some that I've co-sponsored with other members of this committee. And so I'm appreciative that you are supportive and that you have expressed that support to me before. So, and then we've talked about you coming to North Dakota. We would particularly like you to come out in August because we'd like to get this done. Is that something you would look at doing?
I certainly would look at it.
And the other thing I would put in front of you for just your thoughts is, and again, this is going to be different around the country, but it's still, you know, cracking the code on CCUS in terms of making it, taking it from technological or technical viability to commercial viability, making it happen here, and then other places will adopt that technology. But in North Dakota, the other thing we're doing is it's not just on fossil capturing the CO2, but it's also on agriculture, biofuels at the, you know, just CO2 at the farm level, looking at programs for our farmers and ranchers, which they're interested in as long as they're farmer friendly, but then also linking that over to the energy world, biofuels. For example, North Dakota being one of only 2 states in the country where we're actually set up and EPA approved to put that CO2 down whole, ethanol plants in Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota are joining together to build a pipeline, CO2 pipeline to North Dakota to join with our biofuels plants to put that CO2 down hole. So the point I'm making is you would also then see the carbon capture on the renewable energy side as well, and we'd like to show you that nexus as well as the traditional energy.
I would love to see that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator King?
Has the chairman has hit his questions yet? I'm starting a second round.
I'm fine.
Thank you. Just one follow-up. In terms of clean power, I have 3 specific suggestions for research and development.
Great.
First is storage, the second is storage, and the third is storage. That is the key to making solar and wind into baseload power. And there are a number of, I've been reading recently about the molten salt project out west, and of course battery storage, pump storage in various capacities. But that's the key. Once we can do that, in New England, for example, we have a lot of renewables, but natural gas is the backup, which is the logical one for the current situation. But I know there's a lot of research going on. I think that's the highest priority for research that would make the biggest difference in the shortest time, because the renewables are there and ready and very competitive economically, very competitive, but they have to have backup when the wind doesn't blow or when the sun is not shining.
That's exactly right. And I'm sure that if Senator Cantwell were here, she would invite you to the PNNL, which has the grid storage launch pad that they are going to be cutting the ribbon on in September to do this exact thing, research on storage, all aspects.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Senator Granholm, let me thank you again for being here today. I think it was very productive and very informative, and we appreciate it very much. Members are going to have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. With that, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.